Hello everyone, I am Jenelyn Basilan, and today I will tackle about the lesson 13, how to write chapter 1, the problem and its setting. So we have here the table of contents. A. Introduction, guidelines in writing the introduction. B. Statement of the problem. C. Assumption and hypothesis. D. Significance of the study. Guidelines in explaining significance of the study. E. Definition of terms. Guidelines in defining terms. F. Scope and delimitation of the study. G. Limitations. And H. Conceptual framework. So next is the learning objectives. At the end of the lesson, students will be able to identify the process of writing a research paper, describe different guidelines that comprise of writing a research paper, and appreciate the important parts of writing a research. Let's proceed to the introduction. The introduction to a research paper is where you set up your topic and approach for the reader, and it has several goals. Present your topic and get the reader interested, provide background or summarize existing research, position your own approach, detail your specific research problem, and give an overview of the paper's structure. So, ang introduction guys, it leads the reader from a general subject area to a particular topic of inquiry. It establishes the scope, context, and the significance of the research that being conducted by summarize your research paper nga imong gi-make to the current understanding and background information about your topic nga imong gi-make, and state the purpose of the work in the form of your research. So next guys is the guidelines in writing the introduction. So as you can see guys, is naatay 5 ka steps dira kung saan na to pagsuwat ng atong introduction sa atong buhaton nga research paper. So the first step guys is introduce your topic. Mao na ang first job of the introduction guys is to tell the reader kung unsa ang imong topic and nganong interesting siya o important. Step 2, describe the background. Part na siya sa introduction guys na it differs depending on what approach your paper is taking. Step 3, establish your research problem. Next steps na siya guys is to clarify how your own research fits in and what the problem it addresses. Step 4, specify your objectives. Now guys, kay maabot na ta sa specifics of what you intend to find out or express in your research paper. Step 5, map out your paper. Mao na siya ang final part sa introduction guys, is often dedicated to a brief overview of the text of the paper. Next is the statement of the problem. A statement of the problem refers to the critical issue that your research seeks to address. In other words, it captures the existing knowledge gap that your study aims to bridge using reliable results or outcomes. A problem statement can be as little as a few sentences or go all the way to several paragraphs. What matter is it communicates the central focus of your study. So, ang statement of the problem guys is siya. Your study bridges this gap. It leaves room for further investigations. The implication is that your problem statement should be too broad. Instead, it should address one specific issue and contribute to the knowledge pool for further research. So next guys is the assumption and hypothesis. A hypothesis is what is being explicitly by an experiment. An assumption is tested implicitly. By making your assumption as well as your hypothesis explicit, you increase the clarity of your approach and the chance for learning. So the assumption, guys, are the things that are accepted as true or at least plausible by the researcher and peers Who will read your dissertation or a thesis? How are hypotheses and assumptions different? So the key difference is that a hypothesis is an uncertain supposition or explanation regarding a phenomenon or event. It is considered to be true by the researcher, and an assumption is also a kind of belief which is considered to be true. A hypothesis must always go through the process of verification and the investigation. So, the assumptions and the hypothesis, guys, kasi importante sa na siya sa research kay nga naman, it is the foundation in proceeding to the research process. It is important in the experimental design as it guides you on what the things should be done and how they should be done to reach a plausible conclusion. So, how do you write a good assumption and hypothesis? So, first is that state the problem that you are trying to solve. Make sure that the hypothesis clearly defines the topic in the focus of the experiment. Try to write the hypothesis as an if then statement. And last is define the variables. So, next is the significance of the study. What does the significance of the study mean? So, the significance of the study is a written statements that explain why your research was needed. It's a justification of the importance of your work and impact it has on your research field, its contribution to new knowledge, and how others will benefit from it. So, the significance of the study, guys, is to give you space to explain to your readers how exactly your research will be contributing to the literature of the field that you are studying. It's where you explain why your research is worth conducting and how significant is to the community, the people, and the various institutions. So we have here, guys, the tips for writing the significance of the study. First is to reflect on the problem statement. When writing this section of your paper, first is to reflect on what contribution your research is making to your field, the gaps in knowledge in your research field, and why your work should be published. So, your problem statement should be reflected in the introduction of the significance of the study. Your research problem statement can guide you to identify the specific contributions your research is making to your field of study. Next is to write from a general contribution to a specific contribution. So, write your significance of the study in an inverted pyramid format. Start with your research contribution to society as a whole and then proceed to narrow it down to a specific individual or group of people. So when writing your statement of the study, guys, is the length should not be more than 500 words for a thesis and around 200 words for a research paper. However, note that writing the significance of the study depends on your subject area and your content, as there is no single way of writing a perfect significance of the study. Next slide, guys, is the guidelines in explaining significance of the study. So, nati lima ka guidelines diri, guys. First is use your research problem as a starting point. So, your problem statement itself can provide clues to what outcome your research study will achieve and who will benefit from it. The second, state how your research will contribute to the existing literature in the field. So think of the things that, guys, that were not explored by previous studies. Then write how your research tackles those unexplored areas. Through this, guys, you can convince your readers that you are studying something new and adding the value to the field. The third is to explain how your research will benefit society. So in this part, guys, is that tell how your research will impact society. Think of how the results of your research will change something in your community. For example, guys, is that the study is about the use of lemongrass tea in lowering blood glucose levels. So you may indicate that through your research, the community will be able to realize the significance of the lemongrass and other herbal plants. As a result, the community will be encouraged to promote the cultivation and use of the medical plants. 4. Mention the specific persons or institutions who will benefit from your study. So using the example earlier, guys, you may indicate that the results for this research will benefit those people who are looking for an alternative supplement to prevent high blood glucose levels. Last is indicate how your study may help future studies in the field. So you must also specifically indicate how your research will be part of the literature of the field that you are studying and how it will benefit future researchers. In our example earlier, you may indicate that through the data and analysis that your research will provide, the future researchers may explore other capabilities of herbal plants in preventing different diseases. So next, guys, is the definition of terms. Definition of terms is usually an annex to a work, book, research paper, pamphlet, and etc. Either at the beginning or more likely near the end with a list of acronyms, jargon, credit, etc. This is an important part of research paper or report in which the key or important terms in the study are clearly defined. This gives your readers an understanding of the concepts or factors that will be discussed throughout your study, as well as contextual information as to how you will be using those concepts in your study. So, the definition of terms, guys, ensures that your readers will understand the components of your study in the way that you will be presenting them because often your readers may have their own understanding of the terms or not be familiar with them at all. In this section, you provide a list of terms that will be used throughout the dissertation and the definition of each them. So next, guys, is the guidelines in defining terms. So we have here the 6 guidelines in defining terms. First is that only terms, words, or phrases which have special or unique meaning in the study are defined. For example, is the term non-teaching facilities may be used in the study of teaching of science. Non-teaching facilities may be defined as facilities needed by the students and teachers, but are not used to explain the lesson or to make instructions clear. So for example, are toilets or comfort rooms, electric fans, restroom. They may also be called non-instructional facilities. Second, terms should be defined operationally, that is how they are used in the study. For example, guys, a study is made about early marriage. So, what is meant by the early marriage? So to make the meaning clear, early marriage may be defined as one in which the contracting parties are both below 18 years of age. Ang early marriage, guys, is dapat nandiyan na siya sa saktong edad, no? And the third, the researcher may develop his own definition from the characteristics of the terms defined. So like for example, guys, is a house of light materials may be defined as one with bamboo or small wooden posts like nipa, buri or nipa. Mag-same na siya. Walls, split bamboo floor and kugon or nipa roof. This also an operational definition. 4. Definitions may be taken from encyclopedia, books, magazines, and newspapers, articles, dictionaries, and other publications, but the researcher must acknowledge his sources. Definitions taken from published materials are called conceptual or theoretical definitions. Fifth, definition should be as brief, clear, and unequivocal as possible. Sixth, acronyms should always be spelled out fully, especially if it is not commonly known or if it is used for the first time. Next slide is the scope and delimitation of the study. The scope and delimitations of a thesis, dissertation, or a research paper define the topic and boundaries of the research problem to be investigated. The scope details how in-depth your study is to explore the research question and the parameters in which it will operate in relation to the population and the time frame. The delimitation of a study are the factors and variables not to be included in the investigation. In other words, they are the boundaries the researcher sets in terms of study duration, population size, and type of participants, and etc. So the delimitation, guys, is refers to the boundaries of the research study based on the researcher's decision of what to include and what to exclude. They narrow your study to make it more manageable and relevant to what you are trying to prove. So guys, we have here the guidelines on how to write scope. A good scope statement will answer the following 6 questions: the why, what, where, when, who, and how. So the first is the why. The statement there, guys, why, the general aims and objectives or purpose of the research. Next, the what the subject to be investigated and included variables. Next is the where the location or setting of the study, like for example, where the data will be gathered and to which entity the data will belong. Next is the when. When the time frame within which the data is to be collected. The next is who the subject matter of the study and the population from which they will be selected. This population needs to be large enough to be able to make generalizations. Next is the how the research is to be conducted, including a description of this the research design. Like for example, ang imuhang make nga research is experimental research, qualitative research, or a case study, methodology, research tools, and analysis techniques. So, to make things are clear as possible, guys, you should also state why specific variables were committed from the research scope and whether this, because it was a delimitation or a limitation, you should also explain why they could not be overcome with standard research methods backed up by scientific evidence. So, how to start writing your study scope? So, we have here to use an effective way to start writing your scope. First is this study is focused on. Second, this study covers the, and this study aims to. So we have here also the guidelines on how to write delimitations. Since the delimitation parameters are within the researcher's control, readers need to know why they were set, what alternative options are available, and why these alternatives were rejected. So, for example, if you are collecting data that can be derived from three different but similar difference, the reader needs to understand how and why you decided to select the one you have. So, your reason should always be linked back to your research questions, as all the limitations should result from trying to make your study more relevant to your scope. Therefore, the scope and the limitations are usually considered together when writing a research paper. So, how to write your study delimitations? So, natadiri guys, effective ways to write, start to write your study delimitation. We have here first, this study does not cover. This study is limited to. The following has been included from this study. So examples of the limitations in research include the research objective, the research question, the research variables, the research population, and the statistical analysis techniques. Next is the limitations. Limitations relate to the validity and reliability of the study. They are the characteristics of the research design or methodology that are out of your control but influence your research findings. Because of this, guys, they determine the internal and the external validity of your study and are considered potential weaknesses. So, in other words, limitations are what the researchers cannot do, the elements outside of their control, and the delimitations are what the researcher will not do, the elements outside of the boundaries they have set. So, both are important, guys, because they help to put the research findings into context, and although they explain how the study is limited, they increase the credibility and validity of our research projects. So, examples of limitations in research include issue with sample and selection, insufficient sample size, population traits, or specific participants for statistical significance, lack of previous research studies on the topic which has allowed for further analysis, limitations in the technology or instruments used to collect your data, limited financial resources and or funding constraints. So next is the conceptual framework. A conceptual framework represents the researcher's synthesis of the literature on how to explain a phenomenon. It maps out the actions required in the course of the study, given his previous knowledge of the researcher's point of view and his observations on the subject of research. So mao na ang example, guys, na naadiha. So in the other words, the conceptual framework is the researcher's understanding of how the particular variables in his study connect. Thus, it identifies the variables required in the research investigation. It is the researcher's map in pursuing the investigation. Next is the how to make the conceptual framework. So before you prepare your conceptual framework, you need to do the following things. First is that choose your topic. So sa kani, guys, is you need to decide on what be your research topic. The topic should be within your field of specialization. Next is do a literature review. So, you need to review relevant and updated research on the theme that you decide to work on after scrutiny of the issue at hand. Preferably, use peer review and well known the scientific journals as these are reliable sources of information. Next is isolate the important variables. So you need to identify the specific variables described in the literature and figure out how these are related. Next, generate the conceptual framework. So sa kaning part, you need to build your conceptual framework using your mix of the variables from the scientific articles you have read. So that's all of my report. Thank you for listening, guys.